Everybody got in here warm and dry? That's relatively. It's good to see you as we commemorate 189 years, Carroll County's birthday. We are going to have a little song and cake at the end of the presentation. But my name is Jason Alari, and I serve as Executive Director of the Historical Society. And I want to just acknowledge a few folks here before we get started. For one, can we have a round of applause for our volunteers for today and Laura Banker, who pulled it all together. And I believe we have Commissioner Tom Gordon is here with us. Tom, good to see you. And we might see Commissioner Krebs later on today, maybe. We'll see how that goes. We also, I don't know if is Perry here from Congressman Olszewski's office? Is Perry here? She's not quite here. Okay, we have a special treat for you after the presentation before the cake related to Congressman Olszewski's office, so stick around for that. We also want to acknowledge Pastor Matt and his team, Jan, and all the staff here at the church. This is our swan song, our last event here at Grace Church, and it's bittersweet, but Pastor Matt, thank you very much for all of the years of service and partnership with the church. So thank you very much. Our next talk will be the January BLT, and it will be at the Historical Society's campus in our auditorium and exhibit hall space. That is January 20th. Box lunch talk, The Miller's Apprentice, the murder of Abraham Lynn, and the execution of Joseph Davis. And if you need any information about that talk or you're curious about parking, just come see me or Laura about that. Also, Laura wanted me to give another plug for January 29th, our Hard Hat Open House, January 29th, 4 to 6 p.m. If you're interested in seeing the changes that are happening on the Historical Society's campus, we're having a Hard Hat Open House, 4 to 6. Refreshments will be served, and that is January 29th. If you can't make it out in the evening, we're having another Hard Hat Open House on day 2, January 30th, and that's from 2 to 4 p.m. So any of the folks that prefer to come out during the afternoon, January 30th for the second Hard Hat Open House. Coming up in February, mark your calendar for our annual History Expo, February 28th at Winters Mill School, 9 to 1. The Historical Society be there. Of course, we're a major partner in that event. Most historical organizations and museums throughout the county will be there, and it's a great way to support the students in the county. History Expo, February 28th. And then, Ladies' Night at the Museum, March 7th. And mark your calendars for that. Actually, the registration's open. You can register for that now, March 7th, Ladies' Night at the Museum. And if you want more information about that, see Laura. And you can also go on the website to see more about that event. So again, we're going to have cake and our birthday song after Glenn speaks and our other surprise. But I also wanted to ask any other public officials here today, can you please stand and be acknowledged, our public officials besides our County Commissioner, Tom Gordon. Can please stand up and be acknowledged. And Commissioner Kyler, thank you for coming in. Thank you for being here. Right on cue. Oh, that's great. Laura, did I miss something? You want me to say anything else?
No.
Okay. All right, we are going to introduce our speaker for today, Glenn Campbell. And Glenn has earned degrees in history from the U.S. Naval Academy and the University of Maryland, College Park. Following his naval service, he joined the staff at Historic Annapolis in 1997 and was named senior historian of the nonprofit Historic Preservation Education Group in 2008, headquartered in the Paca House. Many of you, I'm sure, have been to the Paca House. It's a marvelous site. You should check it out if you've not been there. Since retiring in 2022, Mr. Campbell has pursued his passion for international travel while remaining engaged in public history as an independent scholar. And can we have a warm round of applause for Glenn? Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Jason, for the, what's that? I got the clicker. I better turn it on, right, so it works. There we go. I was told to save the batteries, so there we go. So thanks to Jason for the introduction and for the invitation to speak here today, and thanks again to all the staff and volunteers with the Historical Society, and also with the church for opening up this great venue. And thanks to all of you for coming out on a not so great day. You're either here for the history or the cake, or maybe both, so thanks for coming out. So my topic today is Patrician Patriot, Charles Carroll and his fellow Maryland signers. The image you see up on the screen there is from a bicentennial publication of the state of Maryland. Hard to believe, but it's been 50 years since the bicentennial. But I think it's interesting that even on a Maryland state publication from 1976, in picturing the 4 Maryland signers, they put them around a guy from Virginia, Thomas Jefferson. They're sort of like planets orbiting the great sun of Virginia. So Maryland's always had kind of a little bit of a sense that we're the little brother, you know, we kind of look up to Virginia and leading the way in the fight for independence. But I want to try to put our 4 signers in context of that era. Talk a bit about their personal lives and their public lives. So a few years ago, the Intercollegiate Studies Institute started putting out a series of books they called The Lives of the Founders. Basically, they were trying to profile important but unjustly neglected figures of the American founding. Basically, who else besides Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Franklin, Madison, and Hamilton should people know something about? So the title there on the left, about Charles Carroll of Carrollton, came out in 2010. But what about Maryland's 3 other signers of the Declaration? Well, for the title on the right there, America's Forgotten Founders, ISI polled 45 scholars. Basically, you know, who else should we look at? Maybe they don't get a whole book, but they get a chapter in this book on the Forgotten Founders. So these 45 scholars came up with a list of 73 individuals they thought were worthy of consideration. That then got narrowed down to 30, and then finally 10 who made that book. Anybody want to guess on how many of the other 3 signers from Maryland made it into that book? None. Okay. None even made the list of 30. None even made the starting list of 73. So Carroll got his due, but the other 3 men, not even a starting mention. So Maryland can't boast an Adams or a Jefferson. Our signers were like most of the 56 men who put pen to parchment in 1776, men who played a relatively brief supporting role on the national stage, but whose primary contributions were made on the local and state levels. So here in Maryland, at least when my kids were kids, I don't know if they still do it, but we have this memory phrase, Paca chased Carroll with a stone. It's a way to help kids learn the names of the 4 Maryland signers. And along with that, kids pick up on some basic facts of the signers, such as Carroll was the only Roman Catholic signer. He was also the last to pass away. And because my kids were of a certain age in 2004, when Disney's National Treasure came out, they also learned that Charles Carroll was the keeper of the cryptic clue that led Nicolas Cage to lost riches hidden by the Founding Fathers. Fun movie, but not based on historical fact. One of those kids, our oldest son, Drew, did the graphic design work for an exhibit that is at the William Paca House. It's called We Hold These Truths, Maryland Signers and the Declaration of Independence. It opened in 2021. And Drew's bold, bright design helps us to see the stories of these four men and the world-changing document they signed in a new light and from a fresh perspective. And in many ways, this talk is sort of a companion piece to that exhibit. In the exhibit and in my talk today, I'll refer to these four men by certain alliterative appellations. So Charles Carroll of Carrollton is our patrician patriot. Samuel Chase is the rabble-rousing rebel, sort of Maryland's answer to Sam Adams of Massachusetts. William Paca is the determined deliberator, and Thomas Stone, the reluctant revolutionary. I want to profile their personal lives, touching on what I call fast facts, kind of, the biographical details, plus something I have that's called just sort of a just for fun fact. We'll look briefly at their formative factors, sort of a little bit about their education, their religion, their social life, and then their financial foundations. Basically, what did they do to earn a living? What do we know about their houses in Annapolis and their property elsewhere in Maryland? And then also their use of enslaved workers. So after looking at their personal lives, they then want to outline their political lives. So John Adams, long after the fact, said that the likelihood of the 13 states coming together in July 1776 was akin to the spontaneous and simultaneous ringing of 13 separate bells. What are the chances that 13 bells would all ring in harmony at exactly the same time? He said that's what it was like coming together in July 1776. In the case of Maryland's four signers, that event marked one of the few times that their personal patriotic bells rang together in unison and harmony. So I want to look at four different points in time. 2 before 1776, 1776 itself, and then a period a dozen years after independence, just to kind of mark where these four guys are in their political journeys. So let us start off with Charles Carroll of Carrollton, our patrician patriot. Carroll's wealth, education, and refined manners stood out among the colonial gentry and even among the other elite members of Congress. Although at first glance, Carroll appeared to embody some of the qualities of a potential loyalist, within this privileged patrician beat the strong heart of a patriot. He was born in 1737 in Annapolis, died in 1832 in Baltimore, and he's buried at Doregan Manor in what is now Howard County, Maryland. His parents were Charles Carroll of Annapolis and Elizabeth Brooke Carroll. Now the signer added of Carrollton, which is one of his Western Maryland properties, to his name to avoid confusion with his father and others who shared the same name. So his father, Charles Carroll of Annapolis, grandfather, Charles Carroll, the settler, his son, Charles Carroll of Homewood, and then some distantly related cousins in Annapolis, Dr. Charles Carroll and Charles Carroll, the barrister. So you can see why it's important to add of Carrollton to kind of differentiate him from all the others. Carroll's parents called him Charlie, and he addressed them in his letters as Papa and Mama. Now, Carroll's parents didn't formally marry until he was almost 20 years old. Biographers theorized that Papa wanted to be sure that Charlie was shaping up to be a fitting heir for his fortune before marrying Mama and thereby legitimizing their son. In a prenuptial agreement, Elizabeth Brooke waived any claims to Carroll family property should she survive her husband. Carroll was a third-generation Marylander of Irish Catholic ancestry and the only child of his parents' union. Ron Hoffman's book, Princes of Ireland, Planters of Maryland, is a fascinating multi-generational study of what he called the powerful sway of the conscious memory and the subconscious influence of Ireland on the Carroll family as it navigated the challenges and opportunities of 18th century America. Charles Carroll married Mary, or Molly, Darnall in 1768 after having her sign a prenuptial contract on Papa's advice. They went on to have 6 daughters and 1 son, and only 3 of the children survived to adulthood. Molly Carroll died in 1782 after years of poor health and habitual use of laudanum, which is an opium derivative. And I've already mentioned our just for fun fact about Charles Carroll. He shows up within the first, I think, 5 minutes of the film National Treasure, since the whole adventure in motion. Now, a bit about his education. Papa's plan for Charlie was that he be educated as what he called a complete gentleman. Carroll attended a Jesuit academy on Maryland's eastern shore before sailing to Europe for 15 years of classical and legal education. He attended colleges at Saint-Omer, Reims, Paris, and Bourges, earning a degree in French civil law in 1759. Carroll then went to London to study English common law, and he returned to Annapolis in 1765. Carroll received an overseas visit from Papa in 1757. Papa had to go to France on some business, and so he visited his son while he was there. But Charlie never saw his mother again after leaving home at the age of 11. Mama died in 1761 while Charlie was studying in England. Carroll was the only Roman Catholic signer of the Declaration. Tellingly, as a young man, he wrote in 1759, "I can't conceive how any Roman Catholic, especially an Irish Roman Catholic, can consent to live in England or any of the British dominions if he's able to do otherwise." Carroll kept a home chapel for use by his family whenever a traveling priest was in Annapolis. His cousin, John, or Jackie as he called him, was educated with him in France, became a priest, and ultimately was named the first Roman Catholic bishop in the new United States. As a bachelor law student, Charles Carroll enjoyed lively coffeehouse discussions, attended horse races and theater performances, and was fond of dancing, but he frowned upon excessive gambling. Back in Annapolis, as a married man, he and his wife Molly were active among the city's elite social set. Carroll hosted both Washington and the Marquis de Lafayette at home and held a public celebration of peace in Annapolis at the end of the Revolutionary War. Moving on to some of his financial foundations, Carroll was regarded as one of the wealthiest men in America at the time of the Revolution, and much of that wealth was produced by the people he enslaved. In addition to being a planter, Carroll was a landlord, moneylender, ironworks partner, and an investor in the Potomac Company, the Susquehanna Canal, the second bank of the United States, and the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. According to what may be an apocryphal story, but it's a good story nonetheless, when Charles Carroll signed the Declaration, a bystander supposedly quipped, "Well, there go a few millions." This building in Annapolis on Duke of Gloucester Street is the Charles Carroll House. It's actually the building you see on the left side of that image. The rectory and church of St. Mary's are on the right. Carroll resided in the house as a boy, and then again from 1765 to 1821. The Annapolis home was purchased by Carroll's grandfather in 1706, expanded by his father about 1750, and then reached this extent after enlargements and improvements by Carroll himself in the 1770s and 90s. He left Annapolis in 1821 to live with his daughter's family in Baltimore, and the Annapolis home was then conveyed to the Redemptorist Order of Catholic Priests in the 1850s. St. Mary's Church and School now stand on former Carroll property. The house is partially restored and open to the public on a limited schedule. This was Carroll's principal plantation, Doregan Manor, which covered more than 13,000 acres. At his death in 1832, Carroll owned about 57,000 acres of land in Anne Arundel, Baltimore, Frederick, and Talbot counties, plus many city lots in Annapolis and Baltimore. Like all of Maryland's signers, Charles Carroll of Carrollton was a slaveholder. He was one of the largest slaveholders in Maryland and indeed the United States. This 1774 inventory lists the names and family relationships of some of the people that he held as property in Annapolis. In 1783, Carroll held 453 enslaved individuals in Anne Arundel County, including 416 people at Doregan Manor and 8 adults working at his Annapolis house. He introduced unsuccessful legislation for the gradual abolition of slavery in Maryland and served as president of the American Colonization Society, which sought to resettle formerly enslaved black people in Africa. Although he manumitted some of his bound workers, Carroll still claimed 259 people as property at his death in 1832. Moving on to Samuel Chase, our rabble-rousing rebel. Chase was a fiery, divisive figure who thrived on what he called noise and politics. He loved them both. Admirers called Chase Old Bacon Face. That was their term of endearment for him. Enemies called him a busy, restless incendiary, a ringleader of mobs, a foul-mouthed and inflaming son of discord and faction, a common disturber of the public tranquility. So you can see he made friends and enemies. Chase was born in 1741 in Somerset County on the Eastern Shore and died in 1811 in Baltimore, and he's buried there at Old St. Paul's Cemetery. His parents were Reverend Thomas Chase and Matilda Walker Chase, and Chase's mother died while he was very young. He was a second-generation Marylander and the only child of his father's first marriage, and he had 6 half-siblings through his father's second marriage. Samuel Chase married Anne or Nancy Baldwin of Annapolis in 1762. They had 3 sons and 4 daughters, and this really charming portrait by Charles Willson Peale shows Nancy with 2 of those daughters. Now, we don't know exactly when or why Nancy Chase passed away, but she died sometime between 1776 and 1778. We actually see in some of Chase's letters right about the time of the big decision about independence that his wife is ill, but we don't really get many details. Afterwards, Chase remarried Hannah Kitty Giles in 1784, and they had 2 daughters. Now, our just for fun fact about Samuel Chase. In the film version of the hit Broadway musical, 1776, Samuel Chase, the big fat guy with the white poofy wig, is the first delegate to point out someone ought to open up a window as the congressional chorus spars with John Adams in the boisterous song, "Sit Down, John." Samuel Chase was educated at home by his father, the Reverend Chase, who was Cambridge educated himself, so certainly well qualified to teach his son at home. And then he studied law in Annapolis under John Hall, who was a fellow future member of the Continental Congress. He, like his father, was Anglican. At least before the Revolution, we would call it the Anglican Church. After the Revolution, it is the Episcopal Church. Same church, just different name. In early America, they're not too excited about calling it the Anglican Church, the Church of England, after the Revolution. And Chase served as a vestryman at St. Anne's Church in Annapolis. The young Samuel Chase was a member, along with fellow future signers William Paca and Thomas Stone, of an Annapolis debating group called the Forensic Club. But he was fined for impious language and ultimately dismissed for what the club called extremely irregular and indecent behavior. Again, back to that noise and politics. That's what really motivated Chase. Chase later joined the Independent Club, but he was rejected for membership by the Hominy Club. Samuel Chase's simple tastes and blunt manner were somewhat legendary. In 1796, as a newly appointed Associate Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, Chase was said to have attended a Philadelphia dinner party where he complained to his hostess, the wife of a senator, that he didn't recognize anything on her table and therefore could not eat. The other guests enjoyed French cuisine and fine wine, while Chase was provided with roast beef and brown stout. To maximize his income, the young Samuel Chase worked a heavy legal caseload, but he always aspired to the life of a planter. He plunged into speculative schemes that sometimes left him in need of financial help from friend and frequent investment partner, William Paca. He faced scrutiny at times for some business deals, as critics suspected him of trading on inside political information. Oh, the Army needs wheat, and Maryland's going to be able to give out contracts? Might be a good time to snap up wheat to sell. The Chase Lloyd House in Annapolis was started by Samuel Chase in 1769. he was not able to finish the property, ran out of money, and sold it unfinished to Edward Lloyd IV in 1771. So it's the Chase Lloyd house because Chase started it. Lloyd was the one who was able to finish it. After he sold the property, he rented more modest housing on West Street. And I think it's very appropriate that Samuel Chase, who loved noise and politics, lived in what is now the Ram's Head Tavern on West Street before moving to Baltimore in 1786. Through the course of his life, Chase bought and later sold or conveyed thousands of acres of land across Maryland. At the time of his death, he still owned as much as 2,500 acres in Anne Arundel, Baltimore, and Frederick counties, and several city lots in Baltimore. Back to the Chase Lloyd house, this is now in a period of transition. For many decades, it was a home, a retirement home for women, but now it's undergoing some major repair work to get the house modernized a bit. Like Carroll, like all of the Maryland signers, Samuel Chase was a slaveholder. He placed this runaway ad in the Maryland Gazette in 1777. In this ad, Samuel Chase described an enslaved man named Sam, who had run away from his property in Frederick County. He had been seen near Annapolis, and I think he may possibly have been trying to return to Somerset County. The ad says that Chase had acquired Sam in Somerset County, so it's possible he may have had friends and family there that he was trying to return to. Chase held 5 enslaved individuals in 1783 and 15 when he died in 1811, making him the kind of the smallest slaveholder among Maryland's 4 signers. He provided legal advice to an anti-slavery group and successfully argued in court that enslaved members of the Butler family were owed their freedom. Still, Chase manumitted only one of his own workers. Moving on to our determined deliberator, William Paca. When John Adams sized up Paca as a deliberator, he didn't mean it as a compliment. Adams thought there was too much deliberation going on and not enough action in Philadelphia. Adams' opinion improved as he witnessed Paca's firm determination to act on his principles. Paca was born in 1740 in what is now Harford County and died in 1799 at his plantation on Y Island. No one knows where he is buried. This marker was placed in 1911 on property that once belonged to his son and daughter-in-law, but it's a memorial, not a gravestone. We think that Paca's remains are probably in an unmarked grave somewhere on Y Island. His parents were John and Elizabeth Smith Paca. He was a 4th-generation Marylander, the 3rd of 7 children and the youngest of 2 sons. Was William Paca Italian? Well, much of the internet thinks so, but researchers haven't found any solid evidence of Italian ancestry. In early Maryland records, the family name was spelled in many different ways, at least a half a dozen different ways before they finally settle on P-A-C-A. William Paca married Mary Chew of Annapolis in 1763. They had a daughter and 2 sons, and then Mary died in 1774. Now, we don't know if a portrait of Mary Paca was ever done, but John Wollaston the Younger painted these portraits of her 2 sisters. I kind of suspect that if Wollaston had done a portrait of Mary, she would have looked exactly like these 2 women. I think all of Wollaston's portraits, pretty much, people all look the same. That's just me. Following Mary's death, William Paca had a relationship with a Philadelphia woman named Lavina, with whom he had 1 daughter. He also had a relationship with Sarah Joyce of Annapolis, and they had a daughter. To his credit, Paca acknowledged and provided for both of what he called his natural daughters. Paca married Anne Harrison of Philadelphia in 1777, and they had a son. So of all Paca's 6 children by 4 different women, only 2 survived to adulthood. Our just for fun fact about William Paca, his biographer, historian Gregory Stuyvesant, wrote in his book about Paca that to a large extent, Paca was the intellect behind Samuel Chase's rhetoric. I have often heard Greg put this another way. Paca was the brains behind Chase's mouth. William Paca attended the Academy and Charity School of Philadelphia and then graduated from the College of Philadelphia, which is now the University of Pennsylvania, in 1759. He studied law in Annapolis under Stephen Bordley, who was colonial Maryland's Attorney General. Like Chase, he was Anglican before the Revolution and then Episcopal after it, and he served as a vestryman at St. Anne's Church in Annapolis. Throughout his adult life, William Paca was a member of several exclusive groups: the Forensic Club, that I've already mentioned, the Hominy Club, the Maryland Jockey Club, and then as governor, he hosted a discussion and supper club for young lawyers. Now, besides the question, was William Paca Italian, the other big question is, why do you pronounce his name Paca? Everybody in Baltimore says Paca. There's Paca Street. Well, we in Annapolis say Paca, not Paca, based on the strength of a rhyme that appears in the Hominy Club records. Basically, at one point, two men wrote to the club and asked, can we attend as visitors? And instead of just sending back a simple yes or no, all of the members had to write a poem giving their assent to the request. So everybody's basically saying, yes, it's fine with me, they can come. And so when it comes to William Paca's turn to give a response, he says, and so do I. Basically, I agree. So do I, though I cannot but think we a take-a, rash step in so doing, but no more from Will Paca. So based on the strength of take-a, Paca, we say Paca in Annapolis. Paca was a lawyer, a planter, and a land investor. Marrying Mary Chew gave him the means to pursue landed wealth and entry into the planting aristocracy. Enslaved agricultural workers produced the tobacco, wheat, and other crops that generated much of his wealth. This home in Annapolis, the William Paca House and Garden, was built in the early 1760s, and Paca resided here from 1765 to 1780. It was restored in the 1960s and 70s and is now a National Historic Landmark site, open to the public. After he sold this house, Paca lived in Philadelphia, the governor's mansion in Annapolis, and then at his plantation on Y Island. He built this home, Y Hall, in the 1790s. When he died, Paca owned over 4,500 acres in Anne Arundel, Queen Anne's, Kent, and Allegheny counties, plus 7 town lots in Annapolis, Baltimore, and Abingdon, most of which were leased to tenants. Paca placed this runaway ad describing Dick, his enslaved waiting man, in 1794. This runaway was likely headed to Philadelphia, where he might hope to blend in with its growing free black population. When Paca lived in Annapolis between 1765 and 1780, his household probably included between 6 and 10 enslaved people. We know the names of 5 of them: Affy, Paul, Bet, Sal, and Denby. Paca also owned the labor of a convict servant man named John Morgan, who ran away in 1766. In 1783, while serving as governor, he held 69 enslaved individuals, 11 of whom lived and worked at the governor's mansion. He manumitted a woman named Nanny for her faithful service in 1796, and he claimed 92 people as property in 1798, a year before his death. Our last signer, Thomas Stone, is our reluctant revolutionary, and I think this reputation is perhaps a bit unfair, but I think it's still accurate. Seeking reconciliation with England was Maryland's official position through the first half of 1776, and so Stone's natural personal caution reflected that of a majority of Maryland's leaders at the time. He was born in 1743 in Charles County, died in 1787 in Alexandria, Virginia, and he's buried at Haberdaventure, his home in Charles County. His parents were David and Elizabeth Jennifer Stone. He was a 5th-generation Marylander, the eldest child of his father's second marriage, with 5 brothers and 3 sisters, and then 2 half-brothers and 2 half-sisters through his father's first marriage. He married Margaret Brown of Charles County in 1768. They had 2 daughters and a son. Stone urged his wife to get inoculated against smallpox in 1776. Margaret had an adverse reaction to the mercury used in the treatment and spent the rest of her life in chronic pain. Thomas Stone blamed himself for her suffering. Now, our just for fun fact about Thomas Stone, he's sort of our Where's Waldo of Maryland. He is the only one of Maryland's 4 signers not included in either of the 2 famous paintings of the event by Robert Edge Pine and John Trumbull. I think this is a clear case of historical and artistic inaccuracy, as Stone was in the room where it happened in July 1776, while Samuel Chase, who is in Trumbull's painting, and Charles Carroll, who was in both paintings, were not present in Philadelphia until 2 weeks later. Okay? Earth-shaking news, July 4th, 1776, not all 4 of our signers were in Philadelphia. 2 of them were in Philadelphia, 2 of them were in Annapolis. I'll get into more of that confusing fact when we get to the political side here in a few minutes. Thomas Stone attended the county school of Charles County, and like 2 of the other signers, studied law in Annapolis afterwards. He was studying under Thomas Johnson, later a delegate to the Continental Congress and Maryland's first state governor. Like Chase, like Paca, he was Anglican/Episcopal. And like 2 of the other men, he joined the Forensic Club in Annapolis. Topics debated by the Forensic Club included whether slavery was legal or not. The men decided no, it wasn't. They were all slaveholders. They debated what form of government was best. They decided that monarchy was tops, followed by aristocracy, and then democracy at the bottom, because they said democracy tends to mob rule. We can't have that. And they also debated whether the people have the right to dethrone a king. Unfortunately, the records do not give their final answer on that crucial question. Stone was a lawyer and planter. Because his Charles County land was poorly suited to growing tobacco, Stone had his workers produce wheat, corn, and other edible crops. After completing his legal training, Thomas Stone lived in Frederick before purchasing land in Charles County, where he built his home, Haberdeventure, in the early 1770s. That property was largely damaged, almost destroyed by fire in the 1970s, but has been restored by the National Park Service and is now open as a National Historic Site. While serving in the Maryland State Senate in the 1780s, Thomas Stone resided in this building on Hanover Street. It's called the Peggy Stewart House, not the Thomas Stone House, because the family that lived there before Thomas Stone was the family of Anthony Stewart. Stewart had a ship called the Peggy Stewart, and when it pulled into Annapolis Harbor in 1774 with a ton of taxed tea on board, Annapolis patriots had Anthony Stewart row out to the ship, and he torched it and burned it down to the waterline. So because of the association with the Peggy Stewart story, it's called the Peggy Stewart House, not the Thomas Stone House. And this is still a private home in Annapolis. Thomas Stone placed this ad describing Bet, a woman attempting to escape enslavement, in a Pennsylvania newspaper in October 1776. He noted that a woman matching Bet's description had been seen in New Jersey, and he offered what was then a substantial $20 reward for her return. Stone held 32 people as property in 1783, and at least 25 when he died in 1787. He willed a woman named Bet to his eldest daughter, but we don't know if she was the recaptured runaway or a different person. So moving on to our political discussion here, starting with the Stamp Act crisis. To pay the high costs of its victory over France in the 7 Years' War and to pay for the continued protection of its colonies, England's Parliament passed the Stamp Act to raise money in America. With this one tax, Parliament enraged Americans from all walks of life. Annapolitans demonstrated their opposition to the Stamp Act in many different ways, some of them violent. In August 1765, a crowd, possibly led by Samuel Chase, dragged an effigy of Zachariah Hood, Maryland's stamp agent, through city streets before whipping, pillorying, hanging, and burning it. Annapolitans never do things by halves. You know, you could destroy an effigy in any one of these ways, but they do them all. Whip it, pillory it, hang it, and burn it. Several days later, Hood's warehouse was destroyed by a number of people unknown, the newspaper article says, prompting Hood to make a hasty exit from Annapolis and its mob. The demonstrations put Samuel Chase, who had already won election to the General Assembly, in the political spotlight as a champion of the common man. Annapolis supporters fondly called him Old Bacon Face for his ruddy complexion, which only got redder the more worked up he got. In the spring of 1766, Chase and his friend William Paca organized local patriots into a chapter of the Sons of Liberty to coordinate future responses to British policies. Soon after, Annapolis celebrated as news arrived of Parliament's repeal of the Stamp Act, and the news for public protests evaporated, at least for a time. Paca's association with Chase and the victory over the Stamp Act led to his own election to public office, first to the Annapolis Common Council and then the Maryland General Assembly. The Sons of Liberty remained an important base of popular support for Chase and Paca in future years. Now, what was Charles Carroll of Carrollton doing all this time? Well, he was in London when Parliament was starting to debate the Stamp Act, and he may have actually witnessed some of these debates before he returned home to Annapolis after 15 years of education abroad. If so, Carroll had valuable firsthand knowledge of how English leaders viewed the American colonists. Still, Carroll wasn't involved in the protests of 1765 or the 1766 formation of the Sons of Liberty, calling the leaders men of little note in a letter to his father at the time. Maryland law barred Catholics from holding public office, but Charlie and Papa carried on an intense private conversation through their correspondence about the political issues of the day, even though they were not openly engaged in opposition yet. In the mid-1760s, Thomas Stone was not yet politically active, and he left no historical clues regarding his position on the biggest issue of that time. And so during the Stamp Act crisis, Samuel Chase was at the patriotic forefront, followed closely by William Paca. Charles Carroll was an interested private observer, but not yet a participant, and Thomas Stone was an unknown non-player. Moving on to our next period, politically speaking, the fee controversy. Probably most of you in this room have never heard of the fee controversy. It is an event that is peculiar to Maryland. No other colony goes through it. It was set off by the expiration of a Maryland law, the 1763 Tobacco Inspection Act, which, among other things, established a table of tobacco fees collected to pay for services performed by certain government officials, and a tobacco poll tax to pay the salaries of Anglican clergymen. In colonial Maryland, the governor, who was selected by Lord Baltimore, appointed those officials and clergymen to their posts, some of which could be very lucrative. The General Assembly's lower house refused to renew the old act or to pass new legislation unless the fees and tax were reduced. This set off a conflict between the lower house and the governor. When the legislature wouldn't do what the governor wanted, he sent them home and issued what was called the Fee Proclamation. Governor Eden said that his political and church appointees could continue to collect their tobacco fees and taxes at the usual rates, even though the law that had set up those rates had expired. Eden's executive order set off a long conflict between his supporters and the supporters of legislative authority. At the heart of the fee controversy was this question: who has the right to tell Marylanders how much they have to cough up to line the pockets of the governor's hand-picked cronies? Is it the proprietary governor himself, named by Lord Baltimore, or should it be the elected members of the General Assembly's lower house, chosen by the propertied freemen of Maryland? Beginning in 1772, the Maryland Gazette published a series of opposing letters penned by Patriot leaders William Paca and Samuel Chase on one hand, and the Reverend Jonathan Boucher, former pastor of Annapolis' St. Anne's Church, on the other. Reverend Boucher wrote some well-reasoned letters backing the governor's position, while at times Paca and Chase seemed to be grasping at legal straws. And Chase had actually flip-flopped on the issue. Remember, his father was a pastor, so his father's livelihood depended on him being able to collect these tobacco taxes. But this was more a fight for public opinion rather than a formal debate. And Paca and Chase won by telling readers they shouldn't have to pay so much. That's always a winning argument. The newspaper battle escalated in 1773 with the publication of the Antolon and First Citizen letters written by Daniel Delaney. He wrote by the pen name Antolon. He was a member of Governor Eden's council, and Charles Carroll of Carrollton, writing as First Citizen, and he was making his first appearance on the political stage. The Carrolls and Delaneys had been on bad terms for years, and this back and forth in the newspaper was a very bitter exchange over complex constitutional issues, but also enlivened by a lot of personal mudslinging. Readers lapped it up. At one point, Delaney stooped to calling the short-statured Carroll a monkey for human diversion. Carroll replied that even a monkey could lead a mob in pulling down a certain man's house and hanging up its owner. When Delaney played the old anti-Catholic card, Carroll deflected the attack with a calm response. He wrote, "What my speculative notions of religion may be, this is neither the place nor time to declare. My political principles ought only to be questioned on the present occasion." Now, Annapolis being the social town that it was, political enemies still saw one another at elite club meetings, dinners, and balls, but relations were increasingly strained. The governor, Robert Eden, had a well-deserved reputation as a wild partier and ladies' man. But Carroll's father encouraged his son to accept the governor's social invitations as if no political conflict were brewing. When Charlie's wife tactfully but firmly fended off an unwelcome advance by Eden at an April 1773 party, Papa was impressed. He wrote, "Give my love to Molly and tell her I congratulate her for it, for I do not know that the governor's smiles or intimacy has redounded to the credit of any ladies on whom he has been pleased to bestow them." Now, the fee controversy also marked Thomas Stone's entry into pre-revolutionary politics, but what we might consider the wrong side of the divide. Because his uncle was then allied with the governor, Stone was asked to join a legal team hired by the governor's supporters to defend a sheriff who was trying to collect the expired tobacco tax under authority of the governor's executive order. Samuel Chase and William Paca opposed the governor's legal dream team and went on to win the case, after which they ridiculed Thomas Stone and his colleagues as defenders of an unjust tax. Riding high on public support following his landslide re-election to the General Assembly, William Paca led a parade through Annapolis up to the State House, where the crowd symbolically hanged, burned, and buried a copy of the fee proclamation. Again, not doing anything by halves. Hang it, burn it, and bury it. Despite his showy parade, Paca managed to maintain a cordial working relationship with Governor Eden through the conflict, and he was an important mediator as they struggled towards a compromise. In late 1773, the General Assembly in Eden finally reached an agreement that allowed Marylanders to pay the poll tax in either tobacco or a cash equivalent, whichever was most advantageous for the taxpayer. The related dispute over government officials' tobacco fees was never settled. Eden's fee proclamation remained the last word on the matter, and patriots continued to ignore it. Overall, an anticlimactic and unsatisfying end to a bitter fight that was unique to Maryland. By 1773, then, Chase and Paca were well-established leaders of the Patriot movement, which had moved from Annapolis city streets and the pages of the Maryland Gazette into the chambers of colonial government and even elite social gathering spaces. Carroll emerged as an intellectual who could explain abstract political principles while more than holding his own in an ugly personal fight. Stone got his political feet wet, but he was on the wrong side of the pond, and he received a ducking from Paca and Chase for his troubles. Governor Robert Eden ended the year well on his way to becoming an irrelevant figurehead for the rest of his doomed administration. Colonial Maryland's General Assembly met for the last time in April 1774, after which Governor Eden refused to call it back into session. Basically, if the legislature wasn't going to knuckle under his will, he wouldn't allow them to meet. That June, an ad hoc group gathered in Annapolis as the first Maryland Convention. Over the next 2+ years, 9 of these extra-legal conventions met, filling the power vacuum created by Eden and taking charge as an unofficial provisional government. Through that period, the convention selected Maryland's delegates to the Continental Congress's meeting in Philadelphia. Typically, either 7 or 8 men served in Congress at a time, with 3 needed for a quorum. Our 4 signers of the Declaration of Independence were among the total of 12 Maryland congressmen during that period. After the April 1775 battles at Lexington and Concord, Congress took on the daunting task of coordinating a unified war effort. It also began to consider a fundamental question. What were the Americans fighting for? A return to peace and renewed relations with England, or something else entirely? Thomas Stone's best-selling pamphlet, Common Sense, argued that the fight should be for nothing less than securing American independence. And coincidentally, Common Sense was published 250 years ago today, January 10th, 1776. Some of Maryland's congressmen were open to the idea of independence, but not everyone was ready for such a radical step, including a majority of delegates to the Maryland conventions. In January 1776, the 6th convention instructed its congressmen not to agree to, quote, any proposition to declare these colonies independent of the Crown of Great Britain, nor to any union or confederation of these colonies which may necessarily lead to a separation from the mother country. In May 1776, the 7th Convention reminded its men in Philadelphia that those explicit instructions still applied. Officially, Maryland still hoped for reconciliation with England. A frustrated John Adams wrote that Maryland, quote, is so eccentric a colony, sometimes so hot, sometimes so cold, now so high, then so low, that I know not what to say about it or to expect from it. Among the Marylanders he met in Congress, John Adams liked the ever-talkative and social Samuel Chase, even if he did sometimes get violent and boisterous and tedious upon frivolous points while debating. He initially sized up Paca as a deliberator, thoughtful but less dynamic than Chase, but later commended him for acting generously and nobly when it was time for action. Chase was the first Maryland delegate to commit to independence, and Paca came to quietly follow his lead in the early months of 1776. Thomas Stone held out hope for a settlement with England, writing in late April, "You know, my heart wishes for peace upon terms of security and justice to America, but war, anything, is preferable to a surrender of our rights." Charles Carroll was an unofficial congressional observer in early 1776. John Adams found him to be a gentleman of independent fortune, perhaps the largest in America, of great abilities and learning, a complete master of the French language and a professor of the Roman Catholic religion, yet a warm, a firm, a zealous supporter of the rights of America, in whose cause he has hazarded his all. In March 76, Carroll and Chase joined Ben Franklin on a mission to Montreal to enlist Canadian support for the American cause. Now, the whole idea of this Canadian mission was cooked up by Chase, backed by John Adams, and approved by Congress. Carroll's cousin Jackie, or Father John Carroll, accompanied the group. As fellow Catholics fluent in French, the Carrolls' job was to ensure French Canadians that the Americans would respect their religion if they supported the revolution. Now, the Canadian mission failed, but several weeks in the company of Franklin and Chase must have helped Carroll resolve any lingering doubts he may have had about American independence. Upon their return home from Canada on June 10th, Chase and Carroll worked to win grassroots support for independence throughout the individual counties of Maryland. Perhaps they thought the people could pressure their delegates in the convention to be more bold. In early June, Thomas Jefferson remarked that Maryland and 5 other colonies were still, quote, not yet matured for falling from the parent stem. In mid-June, John Adams wrote, "Maryland now stands alone. I presume she will soon join company. If not, she must be left alone." But until the Maryland Convention lifted its restriction, its congressional delegates still weren't free to support independence, even if they were personally committed to it. By mid-June, even Thomas Stone was convinced that declaring independence was America's only real option. But he wanted a clear mandate not only from the convention, but from Maryland's people as well. "Collect the opinion of the people at large," he wrote. for we wish to have the fair and uninfluenced sense of the people we have the honor to represent. Fortunately, that's exactly what Carroll and Chase were already doing. At their request, county meetings sent pro-independence instructions to their convention delegates in Annapolis. Over the space of a few days in late June and early July, the situation changed dramatically. Governor Robert Eden saw the handwriting on the wall and arranged for his peaceful departure from Annapolis aboard a British warship. Eden, still generally well-liked despite his personal and political blunders, was cordially escorted to the Severn River and the waiting British ship HMS Fowey. Now, this image is a depiction of the Virginia governor's departure on the Fowey, but I think Eden's departure probably looked much the same. On June 28th, the 8th Maryland Convention acted on all the county instructions sent in at Chase and Carroll's urging. It reversed its prohibition against the vote for independence and authorized its congressmen to, quote, concur with the other United Colonies in declaring them the United Colonies free and independent states. At 9 o'clock that Friday night, Samuel Chase dashed off a note to John Adams. He wrote, "I am this moment from the House to procure an express to follow the post with the unanimous vote of our convention for independence. See the glorious effects of county instructions. Our people have fire, if not smothered." Chase's express rider arrived in Philadelphia on Monday morning, July 1st, just as the great debate on independence began. Congress debated and passed the resolution for independence on July 1st and 2nd, and then on the 3rd and 4th, it revised and approved the declaration drafted by Thomas Jefferson and his committee. Now, the only known proof we have of which Maryland congressmen were personally involved in that process is this small document held in the Maryland State Archives. Because Maryland is relatively close to Philadelphia, I mean, we're just one colony away, a lot of the times our delegates would sort of come and go. They'd work out amongst themselves, you know, who was going to be there and who was going to head home, so we don't always know exactly who's there. This document tells us who was there on July 4th. It's an unremarkable receipt for a treasury order to raise 4 companies of German-American troops in Maryland, signed by William Paca, Thomas Stone, and John Rogers, a name we have not brought up at all. It's dated July 4th, 1776, proving which 3 of Maryland's delegates were then in Philadelphia. Now, this original receipt is attached to a note written in the 19th century by historian Brant Meyer, emphasizing its importance. Basically, Meyer was going through state records, came across this receipt and said, "Oh my gosh, this is what tells us who was actually there." So he pens this note saying, "This is important, don't throw this out." Paca and Stone went on to sign the Declaration of Independence on August 2nd, when the formal copy was ready. But John Rogers missed his opportunity. Back in Annapolis on the 4th, the Maryland Convention had selected 7 delegates to Congress. John Rogers and Robert Goldsboro were off the new list. Charles Carroll of Carrollton was on the list of congressmen for the first time, and 6 others, including Paca, Chase, and Stone, were continued on the list. On July 6th, the convention proclaimed Maryland's own independence. John Rogers headed home to Maryland, while Carroll and Chase arrived in Philadelphia by July 18th, in plenty of time to sign the document that others had approved. Now, as an armchair psychoanalyst, I can almost envision the scene on August 2nd, as Maryland's congressmen took their turns signing the final approved version of the Declaration of Independence, neatly inscribed on parchment. I wondered for a long time, why are the names in this order? This is my theory. Unsurprisingly, Samuel Chase elbows his way to the front of the group. He's always been at the forefront of this group, and so he's taking his rightful space. In a letter to John Adams back on July 5th, Chase had written, "Blessed be the men who effect this work. I envy you. How shall I transmit to posterity that I gave my assent?" He knows something is about to happen of great importance in Philadelphia, and he's in Annapolis. Adams replied on the 9th, "As soon as an American seal is prepared, I conjecture the declaration will be subscribed by all the members, which will give you the opportunity you wish for of transmitting your name among the votaries of independence. So Chase finally gets to Philadelphia. They haven't yet signed the Declaration. August 2nd is his opportunity. He is going to be first to put pen to paper. William Paca is next, resolutely standing behind his more demonstrative friend, and then linking the capital P of his own name with the trailing flourish of Chase's C when he signs. I think perhaps Thomas Stone hangs back a little bit, still not entirely thrilled with the hard realities that have brought himself, the others in this room, and all Americans to this point of no return, but he's committed to follow through. Charles Carroll, the most junior member of Maryland's delegation, politely defers to Stone and indicates that he should precede him at the signing table, and then Carroll himself goes last. After the signing, Paca, Chase, and Carroll returned to Annapolis and seats in the 9th Maryland Convention, where they worked on drafting a state constitution and Declaration of Rights. In Congress, Stone served on the committee that drafted the Articles of Confederation, the blueprint for the United States' first national government. Through the Revolution, all 4 signers continued to serve in various posts. Chase devoted most of his time to the lower house of Maryland's General Assembly, driving the legislative program of the state. Carroll became a fixture in the Maryland Senate for the next 24 years, often serving as its president. And it's through this time that Chase and Carroll really butt heads. They don't always have the same ideas and interests in mind. Stone sat in one or the other of Maryland's legislative chambers over the next few years. Paca had the most varied career, serving longest in Congress until 1780, then holding a state judgeship before being elected governor from 1782 to 85. By 1787, the 4 signers were allied 2 against 2 in a power struggle between the upper and lower houses. Ex-Governor Paca had joined Chase in the lower house, and Stone and Carroll were in the state Senate. The 2 houses were deadlocked on the question of whether or not more paper money should be run off the presses to jumpstart the state's ailing post-war economy. The lower house called for a referendum to force the Senate to pass the bill. Senators were mortified. They thought this would destroy Maryland's bicameral system. They wrote, "Force instead of reason will govern, and liberty must finally yield to despotism." As it played out on the pages of the Maryland Gazette, the conflict between the 2 houses turned into more than just a struggle for power within state government. It became a theoretical debate about Americans' commitment to the concept of popular sovereignty and its practical operation in a representative government. How do you actually make this government work? How do you represent the wishes of the people in an orderly fashion? Later in the year, delegates to the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia debated these same thorny issues, but none of Maryland's 4 signers of the Declaration would participate in that body. Chase refused to be considered as a delegate to Philadelphia, thinking that the weak Articles of Confederation should be amended rather than scrapped. Paca also refused to go, believing that a stronger federal government would threaten the powers of the states and the rights of individuals. They just fought a revolution over these things. He wasn't going to give them up. Carroll was selected to attend the Constitutional Convention, but he decided not to go, even though he was allied with the nationalistic thinkers who came to be called the Federalists. Carroll's distrust of Chase was probably a major factor in his decision not to leave Annapolis. Basically, what might Sam Chase get up to if I'm all the way up in Philadelphia? Stone declined appointment to the convention, probably due to his wife's poor health. And so Maryland was represented by other men at the Constitutional Convention. Once the new plan for national government was completed, it was sent to the states for their approval. Federalist supporters of the U.S. Constitution were in the majority in Maryland at the ratifying convention in Annapolis. With ratification all but assured, Charles Carroll didn't even need to deliver his speech in favor of the document. But Paca and Chase did their best to champion the anti-Federalist cause. Chase gave a long, passionate speech. Had he known, he said, that the revolution would produce such a government as this, he would have been the greatest Tory in America. Rash words that he soon regretted, as they cost him a federal appointment for years. The more practical Paca spent his time and effort writing up a list of 22 proposed amendments and trying to get the Federalists to at least consider them before ratification. Some of Paca's ideas, including guarantees of the freedoms of speech, religion, and the press, eventually found expression in the Bill of Rights. Well, let's wrap up their stories here, and then we can get on to our cake. You've been very patient, thank you. Thomas Stone died in Alexandria, Virginia on October 5th, 1787, just 4 months after his long-suffering wife, while awaiting passage to the West Indies and a change of climate, he hoped. Although he had participated in negotiations between Maryland and Virginia that ultimately led to the call for a new system of government, Thomas Stone died along with the Articles of Confederation that he had helped to create 11 years earlier. We're left to wonder what his reaction to the U.S. Constitution might have been had he lived a bit longer. Despite William Paca's stance as an anti-federalist, in 1789, President Washington appointed him as a federal district court judge, an office he held until his death 10 years later. He died on October 13, 1799, at his Y Island estate, just shy of his 59th birthday and just weeks before Washington's death at the close of the 18th century. Samuel Chase served in state judicial posts in the early 1790s. His respect for Washington and growing distrust of pro-French Jeffersonians gradually brought him into the Federalist camp, and President Washington appointed him to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1796. His controversial rulings and lack of judicial temperament led to his impeachment in 1804, but the Senate acquitted him and he stayed on the court until his death. The position gave Sam Chase a secure living for once, and so he was finally able to give up on the speculative schemes that had raised so many eyebrows earlier in his career. He died in Baltimore on June 19, 1811. Charles Carroll of Carrollton was elected as a Federalist to the first U.S. Senate in 1788, but he resigned in 1792 when a new law barred politicians from serving in both federal and state legislatures at the same time. Carroll's first loyalty was to Maryland, and so he stayed in the state Senate rather than the U.S. Senate. He was voted out of office in the Democratic wave that swept the Federalists from power and brought Jefferson to the presidency. Carroll never again sought political office. After 1811, he concentrated on his many business concerns, including the B&O Railroad, for which he laid the first ceremonial stone in 1828. As the years went by, the aging Carroll reflected on his role in the nation's founding and the legacy of that era, which fewer and fewer Americans now remembered firsthand. The dwindling group of surviving founding fathers worried about the future. Had they set a firm enough foundation? Would younger generations rise to the challenges of their own times? Carroll wrote to John Adams in 1820, "Let posterity gain wisdom from history, and let those who come after us provide remedies against the abuse of power in the representatives of the people or of the people themselves. That such may take place, all interested in the real welfare of these United States must earnestly desire." After the deaths of Adams and Jefferson on July 4th, 1826, Carroll was the last surviving signer of the Declaration, which made him a living national treasure and symbol of a bygone era. He died in Baltimore on November 14th, 1832, at the age of 95. His will left his massive estate to his daughters and granddaughters with the stipulation that their husbands not have control of the assets. So, real turnaround there for Carroll. Ironic that this aristocrat of the 18th century died during the era of Jacksonian democracy and at the start of the Age of Steam. A year before his death, Carroll received a visit from Alexis de Tocqueville. The Frenchman described their meeting in his book, Democracy in America. Tocqueville wrote, "Our conversation turned on the great time of his life, that is, the Revolution. He reminded us with very natural pride that he had signed the Declaration of Independence, and that by doing so he risked, together with his life, the most considerable fortune that there was in America. We talked of the government of the United States. Charles Carroll showed that he missed the old aristocratic institutions of Maryland. The general tone and content of his conversation breathed the spirit of the English aristocracy, mingled sometimes in a peculiar way with the habits of the democratic government under which he lived and the glorious memories of the American Revolution. The whole way of life and turn of mind of Charles Carroll make him just like a European gentleman. Probably the great southern landowners at the time of the Revolution were very much after this fashion. The race of men is disappearing now after having provided America with her greatest men. With them, the tradition of cultivated manners is lost. The people is becoming enlightened, attainments spread, and the middling ability becomes common. The striking talents, the great characters, are rare. I thank you all for your attention. I would encourage you, if you've not yet been to the William Paca House, or if you haven't been in a while, I'd encourage you to visit and see our exhibit, We Hold These Truths. And thank you for your attention. And do we have time for questions, or are we seriously eating into cake time here?
I think if we can, what we'll do is maybe during cake time, people can come and see you and chat with you about any questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, we're getting there. We're getting there to the cake, I promise. Perry Odenwald, do you mind joining me here at the podium from Congressman Ochesky's office? And could we have our commissioners join me here at the podium as well? Commissioner Kyler, Commissioner Gordon, thank you.
How you doing? Perry, how you want us?
Well, Perry, maybe you could say a few words of who you are and then what you're doing for us.
Yes, thank you. I'm Perry. I'm with Congressman Ochesky's office and came to give a citation in honor of Carroll County in celebration of Carroll County's 189th birthday. We honor the legacy of Charles Carroll and other Marylanders who signed the Declaration of Independence. Thank you to the Historical Society, Carroll County, for your contributions in preserving the history and celebrating this milestone. Thank you.
You guys want to say anything? Go ahead. You want to offer any words?
I'll be real brief, totally off the cuff today, but first off, I want to thank you for coming out from the Congressman's office. It's always a pleasure to see you in Carroll County. As always, it's great to see a wide variety of you who I know personally, and what a wonderful opportunity to get to hear some history today, obviously be inside from the rain, get to enjoy some cake, but more importantly, get to celebrate Carroll County history. So I just want to thank you all for coming out today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for letting me be present today. This was interesting. It's fascinating to me, some of the things that brought us to where we are today. And it's interesting, I think in the one thing they mentioned, like, things are changing and men are whatever. It sounds like my grandfather and my father and now me. So thank you very much.
I have to say, on behalf of the Historical Society, I want to thank the commissioners also for supporting our county's 250 efforts. Yes, very much. Thank you for that. 2026 is going to be a big year for Carroll County, commemorating 1776 to 2026. And I just want to spend and then pass that thanks on to both of you. And so I think we're going to have some cake soon, but I would like to ask one, I think it's going to take a little time to cut the cake, but Glenn, could you just come up and speak a little bit, just a couple minutes on the naming of Carroll County. You said you looked into that a little bit, and it wasn't a lot there, but maybe you could just give us a taste of what was going on there, the naming of Carroll County. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I was talking to Jason when I got here today. I looked into legislative records of the state, and all this stuff is available online. through the Maryland State Archives. I was hoping there would be something really inspirational in the law that created Carroll County, some flowery phrase about Charles Carroll. The county was created 5 years after Carroll's death. And Carroll was just seen as this icon of the founding era, the last surviving signer of the Declaration. I thought, surely there's something wonderful about him in the creation of the county legislation. No, not a thing. What I did find is that the law was first passed to create Carroll County in March 1836. Basically, they took a slice of Baltimore County and a slice of Frederick County and created the new county. So the law was passed in March 1836, but it said the law has to pass again in the next General Assembly to make it be effective. And during that year's time, people can send in their pros or cons to this law. And so the debate begins in January 1837, began on January 11th in the General Assembly. The law basically lays out what all the borders are going to be of this new county, but nothing about Charles Carroll's history himself. And you do see in the legislative record that so-and-so reads a petition in favor of this law from people in Baltimore County, and then there's a couple people in Frederick County who've sent a petition in against this law, so you get your pros and cons from both counties, but then the law finally passes. And it passes pretty handily in the lower house, 51-23 on January 14th, and then it passes 13-1 in the Senate on January 19th. So after that, Carroll County comes into his own.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you very much. I found some friends here, and they're excellent singers. Cicely and Dirk, right? And you were just researching at the Historical Society, weren't you? You found some cool things?
Yeah.
Was it a good time? Yeah. Okay, so can you kick us off with the Happy Birthday song for Carroll County? 1, 2, 3, go! Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Carroll County. Happy birthday to you. Thank you, guys. I think that stalled us enough to cut enough pieces of cake. We're good to go. Right, Laura? Thank you again for coming out. Enjoy your time together. And I'm sure, Glenn, if anyone has follow-up questions, they can see you, right? Yeah, all right. Thanks again.